Good afternoon. Our program is beginning shortly as we allow all attendees to join us via Zoom. Welcome to all. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Rogers. I'm the Executive Director for the Kelowna Chamber of Commerce. Welcome today to this special Okanagan College School of Business Speaker Series event as we welcome the leader of the official opposition, the Honourable Erin O'Toole. He will be more formally introduced in just a moment. We want to thank everyone for joining us. We expect a fairly large crowd today. I know a number of them are tuning in as we go through our introductory slides. And Mr. O'Toole, if I could indulge on you, one of the things we did find out about Zoom is we need to do our self-promo at the start because people leave at the end right away. So we'll get to the formalities in a moment, but we have some introductory slides that we would like to go through. Not the least of which is acknowledging that for many of us, we are gathered today on the traditional unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people, and we thank them for the rich history and culture. Today, of course, is another beautiful day in the Okanagan. Next week, just as a heads up, 40 degrees plus for most of the week. So it's going to be a blue blazer all of next week, but it's going to be a wonderful weekend here in the Okanagan. Welcome to our virtual event on the Okanagan Speaker Series, a virtual town hall with the Honourable Erin O'Toole, Securing Canada's Future. It's a pleasure for all of us, including those other chambers from the Okanagan Valley that are part of the Okanagan Chamber's COVID Response Coalition. Okay, we've got this initiative. And we'll introduce them as we continue along. We will have some remarks from the Honourable Erin O'Toole. We'll provide some questions and answers. Some of those have been prepared in advance, but you are joining us, so you can use the Q&A function, and feel free to add that at any time. We'll go to that after the opening comments from Mr. O'Toole. Just a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be made available through the Kelowna Chamber YouTube channel following today's session. I do want to acknowledge some special guests that have joined us, including MPs Tracy Gray and MP Mel Arnold. Thank you for joining us, our Okanagan MPs. Also want to acknowledge MLA Ben Stewart is in attendance, so thanks Ben for joining us. And a special shout out to our local government representative, Councillor Jason Friesen from the City of West Kelowna, who has joined us today. Also want to acknowledge our President's Circle members, those that invest significantly in the Kelowna Chamber. They are on your screen. They include MMP Accounting Consulting, UBC Okanagan, Rogers for Business, and Interior Savings. We couldn't do the work in building a stronger economy for the Okanagan without the investment of all our members, and certainly the President's Circle members. Also want to acknowledge our Affinity Program members and supporters, Chamber Group Insurance, the #1 employee healthcare plan in the country, and our local broker, TD Benefits. And here's where the blatant plug is for the next one. Before you leave, mark this in your calendar. Wednesday, July 7th, we'll have a great lineup of speakers from Rogers for Business talking about what 5G will mean to business and city services here in the Okanagan. It's transforming the landscape in the Okanagan. Whether you're a large or small business, you'll want to join this session to find out how this will help you leverage your business into the future. So Wednesday, July 7th, you can register online through the Chamber website. That's our next Okanagan School of Business Speaker Series event. As I mentioned off the top, we are doing this in conjunction with our other colleagues in the Okanagan. As part of the Okanagan We Got This coalition, the chambers that are participating, the 7 are noted on your screen. Just a quick note, among things that you can get on this site, the resource guide for small business resiliency developed in partnership with chambers here in the Okanagan, as well as the BC Chamber with support from the BC government. You can find and download that document at Okanagan. We've got this .com under the resources section. You can find a lot more information, including some celebration of some really resilient businesses in the Okanagan. A reminder, our golf tournament is sold out. We're set for the 21st. We're still looking for donations for the swag bag. And the last plug, we are about to launch, so watch closely. It's the biggest business event in the Okanagan, our awards gala on Friday, November 5th. Hopefully we're not going to the polls around that time. Well, what the heck, that'll keep other people busy, but we will be busy with the Business Excellence Awards. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to our representatives from Jonathan Rouse, who I'm going to bring in, and if you could open up your camera, the Associate Dean for the Okanagan School of Business, to bring greetings on behalf of the School of Business. Jonathan, thanks for joining us.
Many thanks for the introductions, Dan. Yes, on behalf of Okanagan College, and in particular the Okanagan School of Business, we wish to extend warm greetings to everyone attending today's virtual session. Speaking of virtual, I suspect many of you are getting a little bit tired of all the virtual meetings that we've been engaged in. And one thing I would like to quickly share with everyone is that at Okanagan College, we are anticipating and working towards all students, faculty, and staff to be back on campus this fall. So we're all, as you can appreciate, extremely excited about that, to bring all 4 campuses back to life again. In the case of the School of Business, we are going to still continue offer online courses because they have proven to be extremely successful. But for the most part, we're all coming back to campus, or we're hoping to be back on campus this fall. So again, warm greetings from Okanagan College, and I'm looking forward to the session today with the Honourable Erin O'Toole. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate you joining us and for providing us a brief update from the School of Business. At this stage, I want to turn things over and get things underway with respect to our presenting or our introductory sponsor. I'm going to call upon Parminder Singh. Parminder, if you could just turn your camera on and join us now. Excellent. Parminder Singh from Kindra Construction Limited. Parminder, I want to thank you for sponsoring today's event and helping us out, and you will provide the introductions for the Honourable Erin O'Toole.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Parminder Singh, and I thank the Chamber for this opportunity to speak briefly about our Canadian-based companies today before I have the honor of introducing Mr. O'Toole. I have several companies here in Canada. We are based in Surrey, BC, and I've been commuting to Kelowna, where we are about to commence building new homes in Rutland. The development is called Jane 1, and we're about halfway through selling units, and I have just begun framing. I also have companies which look after immigration requests and background checks. My family has been in BC for almost 25 years. My wife is a realtor, and I have one daughter in UBC Vancouver and one attending grade school. I'm proud to be a member of the Kelowna Chamber as the principal of construction, and look forward to meeting many chamber members over the next few years. All of us look forward to moving to the Okanagan permanently. Oh, what a great place to live. Now, it is my honor to tell you about the Honourable Erin O'Toole, leader of the official opposition and head of the Conservative Party of Canada. Mr. O'Toole has led a life of service. Born in Montreal, he grew up in Ontario. He enrolled in Royal Canadian Air Force when he was 18 and attended RMC. He saw Canada in the RCAF, finally serving out of Halifax as a navigator. Meanwhile, he took part in search and rescue and learned French. After 12 years of military service, Erin retired and spent the next 10 years working in the private sector as a corporate lawyer. He has been elected to 3 times as an MP for Durham, Ontario. He served in multiple roles, including international trade, before becoming Minister of Veterans Affairs. After serving as a Conservative Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs for 2 years, Erin is now the leader of Canada's Conservatives. Erin is married to Rebecca, and they have 2 children, Molly and Jack. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Honourable Erin O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Parminder, for the introduction. It's very kind. And I look forward to meeting you and many members of the Chamber when I can get back out to BC, which will be soon. And let me start by telling a little story. When I was 13 years old, I took the train from Toronto to Vancouver with my grandfather to see Expo 86. And that's when my love for British Columbia began. Now, 5 years later, I'm back as a young officer cadet for boot camp in Chilliwack. That wasn't really a vacation like Expo. Got to see the Lower Mainland, and later I did training on the island at CFB Comox. Then, as a member of Parliament and Cabinet Minister, I was fortunate to build more relationships across British Columbia, including in Kelowna and the Okanagan, with veteran groups, the wine industry, and with small business. I wish I could be with you in person today, because as I said to Dan at the beginning, you are in one of the most beautiful corners of this great country. But until I can get out there, I'm glad to be with you virtually to discuss the ways we can tackle the critical issues facing BC, facing the Okanagan, facing Canada, coming out of COVID-19. Now, as leader of the opposition, I have a job to do to hold the Liberal government to account. That's my job. It's great to see the country reopening now and beginning that process, even in my province here in Ontario, which is hit hard. Everyone wants to see COVID behind us. That unites all Canadians. And it has been frustrating to see the United States, the United Kingdom, and other countries having been open for months. Arenas in the United States are filled for hockey playoffs and only a few bums in seats in Canada. This difference has been due to a slow, confused, and often incompetent response by the Trudeau government, from the border at the beginning to rapid tests to vaccines. Ottawa has generally been months behind the G7. Canada used to be a leader. We used to be champions that the world looked to. But under the Trudeau Liberal government, we've increasingly become a laggard. From vaccines to capital investments and competitiveness, every year we've been falling further and further behind. People of the Okanagan deserve better. And Canadians need to see the return of Canadian optimism and Canadian ingenuity. But most of all, we need to see the return of Canadian leadership. Leadership for the well-being of our citizens. Leadership for our economic prosperity. And leadership that will bring unity to this great country. Because following COVID-19, the very future of Canada is at stake. Our country, businesses are at a crossroads. Soon, Canadians will have to decide which path we want to take at these crossroads. One path is one of more debt, more insolvencies and job losses, more division, pitting region against region, sector against sector, and one that always seems to tear the country down. This is the path of the Liberals and the NDP and the Greens, because really, they're just the same party. But there is another path, a one that we're offering with the Conservative Party of Canada, a path that will deliver us a Canada where those who've struggled the most throughout this pandemic can get back to work, especially workers in Kelowna's growing tourism, technology, and agricultural sectors across the Okanagan. A path that will offer us the ability to build the country up and not tear it down. This spring, I introduced Canada's Recovery Plan, a plan to secure our future. A Conservative government will enact a comprehensive jobs plan to recover the 1 million jobs lost during the pandemic, and we know we can reach that target within 1 year. Small businesses in the Okanagan need a government who will stand with them and is committed to helping them thrive after the pandemic. We will rebuild main streets from your part of the country to my part of the country to assist small businesses and provide incentives to invest in rebuild, and even start new businesses. We will target and help those who've suffered the most, including business owners, women, young people. I'm happy to see the return of craft markets back in downtown Kelowna, and that outdoor markets will be taking place during the summer. Because I know that Kelowna's tourism and hospitality sector is key to their success, and we know it's been one of the hardest hit by the pandemic. The recent budget of the Trudeau government, after 2 years without a budget, barely addressed the tourism sector and didn't target special resources to communities, to sectors critically hit by COVID. The truth is, tourism and hospitality will actually be among the last sectors to fully recover post-COVID-19. MP Tracy Gray, Mel Arnold, and I, we talk about this challenge regularly. In the coming months, Conservatives are looking at ways to work with the travel and tourism sectors to support and accelerate their recovery alongside a safe and swift reopening. We will create long-term growth and jobs to build prosperity that all Canadians seek. We'll also help support Canadian families. Many Canadians, especially in the Okanagan, are being forced to give up on the dream of home ownership. Affordability in British Columbia building. We need to accelerate this. And the problem's been exacerbated by COVID-19. Increasing supply is really the only long-term sustainable solution to make housing more affordable. And I want you to know that a Conservative government will do everything possible with the province and municipality that housing also remains accessible to all Canadians. The second pillar of our recovery plan will enact the toughest accountability and transparency laws in Canadian history. We must restore the faith of Canadians in our national institutions and in the government itself. From the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister himself, who's been subject to 3 ethics investigations, to the Canadian Armed Forces, where we've lost 2 chiefs of defense staff. Canadians want to see these institutions doing better. They want transparency and trust restored, and we will bring that. Our third pillar, the pandemic has deepened Canada's mental health crisis. Families and communities in every part of this country are struggling with isolation and loneliness. They're among the top factors affecting mental health, especially in our young people. I know how important this topic is for Kelowna. I was happy to see how Kelowna residents launched the He app to help men in your community come together to focus on mental health and well-being. Amidst the pandemic, too many families have been torn apart and have had their lives also destroyed by the opioid as part of this mental health crisis. Those who are already struggling are finding the struggle worse. Last year, British Columbia, there were 60% more deaths from the opioid crisis than due to COVID. And in Kelowna, 18 people have lost their lives to drug overdoses so far this year. I've said that the opioid crisis for our country has become the pandemic of tears within the COVID-19 pandemic. This is not only a local emergency, it is a national emergency. And we have to have a plan to address the tsunami of mental health challenges that will come from the pandemic. We need to create solutions together so that battling depression and those battling it and their families know where to turn for help. That's why the third pillar of our plan will launch a mental health action plan, boosting funding partnerships with the provinces, but most importantly with nonprofit groups on the ground for mental health care. And we will create a nationwide 3-digit suicide prevention hotline so that consistent help is available everywhere in Canada. And I'm proud a BC MP from Prince George has been driving that national hotline effort. Fourth, I will ensure our country is never again unprepared for a crisis. We will make Canada more resilient, reduce our reliance on countries like Communist China, and take our responsibility seriously to protect the health of Canadians. This means enhancing domestic capacity in vaccines, critical medicines, and a stockpile of national PPE. Finally, our fifth pillar, a Conservative government will secure Canada's economy by getting the budget back to balance over the course of the next decade. Spending to protect Canadians during the pandemic is the right thing to do, and Conservatives in opposition, we've supported that. But we cannot pass unsustainable debt levels to our children and future generations. Once the recovery starts, we need to get spending under control, and that's what Conservatives will do. We will also get the economy growing again to secure the revenue needed to pay for the important government services Canadians depend on. Last month, the Mackenzie Tour announced the Golf BC Championship will return to Kelowna. The return of professional golf to your neck of the woods is a significant sign to me and to many that we're near the end of the pandemic. That is so good to see. Recently, and this is something important for your beautiful region, which I've got on the screen next to me, beautiful. I was proud to release the Conservative plan for the environment. Traditionally, the approach of the Liberal government to climate change has meant big government taxing consumers and small businesses and phasing out jobs when we need them the most. Conservative approach will empower Canadians and reduce emissions while preserving jobs in all sectors and in all regions. In fact, we worked with a BC climate change modeling firm to verify that the Conservative climate change plan will achieve the same emission reductions as the Liberal government's current plan, but with vastly better jobs and investment outcomes. We will also make Indigenous reconciliation central to our leadership as a government. The horrific fines in Kamloops and this week in Saskatchewan remind us of the need to move on truth and reconciliation calls to action, particularly with respect to missing children. I will move because action, trust in the government actually getting things done, is core to reconciliation. We need action far more than just the words we've heard in recent years. So the decisions we collectively take in the next few years will define Canada for this generation and the next. And as the father of two young kids, my greatest worry is failing to leave them a better, stronger Canada. That is what drives me. And I'm sure that's what drives all of your members. As we recover from COVID-19, it is time for certainty and competent leadership in Ottawa. It's time for Canada to be champions for excellence, for prosperity, and for the unity of this great country. Our recovery plan will get the economy back on track in Kelowna and all parts of the Okanagan, and for families and businesses struggling across Canada. Together, with a plan, we will secure our future. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions. I think you may be on mute, Dan.
Yeah. I was just testing to see if the Zoom behavior was there. And thank you. I've been caught twice this week, so appreciate that. I'm asking some of my colleagues, thanks Amber for joining us from the Greater Westside Board of Trade. We're going to go to some questions that we had developed in advance from some of our colleagues. We're going to start with Amber, representing the board from the Greater Westside Board of Trade. A question to Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Mr. O'Toole. I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much both to the Chamber and yourselves for making it possible for me to come here today and ask a question on behalf of my members and our Advocacy and Policy Committee. So it's a great honor to be representing such an amazing Greater West Side. I'm trying not to be as animated as I normally am, but I usually fail. So the question is a short one today, but we would like to know, would the Conservative Party support the right of employers in health-sensitive areas to require their staff to be vaccinated?
Well, thanks, Amber. I love enthusiasm, so that is welcome. And this is an important question. I've been saying for over a year now how critical vaccines are for our response to the pandemic, both on a health side to protect Canadians, but also on an economic side, because the faster we have the vaccines, the more we can prevent spread and keep the economy open. In fact, the third wave in Canada was a mistake of the Trudeau government. We were slow with vaccine rollout, so they didn't have a third wave in the United States or in the UK, for example, because they had that deployment. So getting it out, particularly in areas of potential high transmission, is key. So what we want to do as a federal government is work with the provinces to get them the supply and to get the public information and the tools there. And then, as you know, the provinces run the healthcare system. So decisions about vaccination rates, prioritization of different healthcare jobs and things like that, that is a provincial responsibility, but that vaccine supply is critical. And there's three tools in a pandemic: vaccines, rapid tests, and information. And I'll tell you, we were slow on all three. And the week I got my AstraZeneca and my wife Rebecca got the AstraZeneca, a few days after that, 4 different parts of the federal government had different things to say about AstraZeneca on the same day. The Prime Minister, the Minister, Dr. Tam, and NACI. We've got to learn the lessons from where the federal government dropped the ball here, and that's what I'm committed to. In fact, we'll have more on that as part of the 4th pillar of our plan in the coming weeks.
Well, thanks, Amber, and thanks, Mr. O'Toole. I'm going to go now south to Penticton. I'm going to call upon the chair of the board for the Penticton Chamber of Commerce, no stranger to us here in the Okanagan, Jonathan McGraw, the president. So I'll turn things over to you for a question to Mr. O'Toole.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, Mr. O'Toole. It's good to see you again. You were with us last month or 2 months ago in Penticton, so it's good to see you again. Many businesses feel the weight of carrying the tax burden with all levels of government, whether it's the local government, provincial government, and federal government. What scares many is how much more of the current federal debt load is going to fall on their shoulders as they struggle coming out of this pandemic. So the question is, can we expect tax legislation that is sensitive to the business community from a conservative government? And if so, what changes to the current tax legislation needs to be addressed first?
Well, thanks, Jonathan. It's good to see you virtually again. As you know, as a high school triathlete, it was always my dream to go to Penticton and do the Ironman Canada when I was young. And I think my body hasn't kept up with those ambitions, but I still run. The tax burden on small and medium-sized businesses has been crippling. And of course, we've talked about the unfair automatic escalator tax for the beverage alcohol industry, which we will eliminate. But the overall complexity of tax and regulation is driving down investment and job creation. I hear this all the time from small businesses who say, Erin, you used to be the in-house counsel for Procter & Gamble. I worked for one of the largest companies in the world on trade, on investment in Canada. They could afford an army of lawyers and accountants and regulatory scientists. Small and medium-sized businesses don't have the same access to regulatory support. So we have to make things simpler, less burdensome from a red tape standpoint, and we're committed to that. In fact, we're going to not have a royal commission or anything, but we're going to have a very quick examination on how we can simplify the tax system and rate for small and medium-sized businesses. Because every hesitation on an expansion or investment means fewer jobs. 2/3 of Canadians work for a small or medium-sized business. All of your, or most of your members would qualify in that SME space. If we had all of them hire just one more person, that would basically accelerate our economic recovery post-COVID. So we're committed to actually trying to keep tax rates low or even strategically lower them further to incentivize hiring in some cases. We're going to announce a very ambitious, highly impacted sector for travel, for tourism, for hospitality to help accelerate their recovery. And then how can we keep the regulatory and tax burden low on small and medium-sized businesses? We're going to actually work with chambers to bring that complexity, bring that rate down, because it's a competitive advantage for us if we're seen as a destination for talent and investment. That will be central to our economic recovery.
Well, thanks, Mr. O'Toole, and thanks, Jonathan. Could I add just a follow-up there? And it's something we reference a little bit later when we talk a little bit about affordable housing. But Mr. O'Toole, maybe your perspectives. A lot, there's only one taxpayer. You hear that quite often, and we're hearing from small businesses that say, yeah, I accessed the wage subsidy program, and maybe there was a provincial grant, but it was just too complex and bureaucratic. I couldn't get there. And now then I got my tax bill and my property tax notice, and it went up like 40, 50%, well beyond any increase in their property value. So what's the role of the federal government, giving local governments are a creature of provinces, but there's only one taxpayer? Is it the role, do you believe, of the federal government to kind of bring those parties together and understanding there's different levels of government, but there's only one taxpayer?
Great point, Dan. There is only one taxpayer. And as I've said, if we see a rash of insolvencies with small and medium-sized businesses coming out of COVID, that will be, the fourth wave could be economic only, not health, because we've got a lot in critically impacted sectors where the owners, often families, one or two families, have taken on high levels of debt, are leveraged, and in some cases, the programs didn't work for them. We're going to have very targeted, very generous programs related to maintaining the survival of small and medium-sized businesses, a series of loans and incentives in terms of their workforce, because if they survive, and I worked on insolvency as a lawyer in the private sector, including the restructuring of Air Canada. If you are able to restructure and survive a downturn like this, you save the jobs, the pension, the supply chain networks, and then you have that business poised to really grow the GDP when times get better and they can actually hire and expand. So this is why our plan to balance the budget isn't a rapid plan, because we know in the first couple of years of a Conservative government, some targeted aid to help those parts of the economy survive, particularly tourism, that the rapid test failure by the Trudeau government to deploy them nationally at our borders and ports of entry is why the Alaska cruise ship business is passing British Columbia by, for example. International travel is encumbered by the Trudeau's slow approach at borders and airport rapid screening and testing. So the federal government, the best thing we can do is use the federal tax infrastructure and accelerate direct help to those businesses. And then anytime we can partner with the other levels of government, municipalities, provinces, we will try and do that. And to prove my point, during the pandemic, we voted for all the emergency programs, and then we tried to fix them. We fixed the wage subsidy, got it from 10% to 75%. That was the Conservatives pushing. We got changes to the rent support programs. It took us longer to drive the changes. And our central frustration is the Trudeau government put these blanket, quick, urgent programs that were understandable in a crisis. But as we got through the first wave, we should have learned and started focusing aid on where it was needed most. And that's what they refused to do. So we have some firms that have received government taxpayer support and have had record profit years, and we've got others hanging on by a thread. So we will be much more smarter, much more nimble.
Thanks, Jonathan. For that, I'm going to now switch and come back up to the Central Okanagan, and I'll ask our chair of the board, Jeffrey Robinson, to come and join us. And before I turn things over to Jeff, I should acknowledge we have a former MP and current board member, Ron Cannon, who's done a lot of work for this community over the years, including continuing as a member of the board. So he is also with us. Probably should plug that Tracy Gray spent a little time with the chamber in the past as well. So Jeff, over to you for a question to Mr. O'Toole, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole, for making time for us today. You're probably aware that Kelowna does have a strong aerospace industry anchored by KF Aerospace, a real great domestic success story. And you, as a former RCF navigator, must understand the strategic impact and the robust contribution to economy that an aerospace sector can have. What are your views on how best to address the challenges our airline and aerospace sectors are facing as a result of COVID?
Great question. And one of our frustrations has been the unwillingness for the government, Mr. Trudeau, to work with us on areas like aid specifically to the airlines and to the travel sector. In fact, last fall, shortly after I became leader, we expressed our desire to actually support a loan type structure program to the airlines, including regionals. And we only had a few criteria for us to get behind it right away, because all the other G7 countries provided support, only the Trudeau government didn't. Our only requirements, and my shadow minister, Stephanie Cusey, has dealt with all of the players, all of the airport authorities, all the unions representing pilots, flight attendants, ticket agents. We only wanted regional routes to be maintained. That's something the Okanagan knows the importance of very well. We wanted employment guarantees, because if they were going to be getting these supports, we wanted a series of proposals for refunds or support for passengers that were left stranded. And we wanted no dividend or executive compensation to come out of what is an emergency loan. Not only did they miss 6 to 7 months of this goodwill we showed, they then didn't even structure it properly. And of course, there were some executive comp elements. And why we didn't want to see that, it erodes public confidence if people think that's where the funds are going. We knew everyone worked hard. A lot of the airlines brought Canadians home from all over the world. And so we need that sector to survive as literally the spinal cord of our tourism and hospitality industries in Canada. And I will say, Jeff, really proud of the world-class aerospace industry. Canada's always been the 4th or 5th biggest player in the world. We've got hubs in British Columbia, Winnipeg, where we have engine rebuilds that are the world-class center is there. Of course, Toronto and Montreal. I've worked with those sectors both in the private sector, where I worked on trade issues for companies like CAE and others. And I visited some of their work globally on trade in Asia, where CAE sells simulators and other things, and where we've sold wing and engine parts. And this is an ecosystem we need to maintain leadership in. We have to have exciting and easy ways to invest. We have to have a desire to be competitive and to go after some of this capital investment. And I am well suited, given my Air Force background and my business background. So thank you for the question. And on some of this trade stuff, I have to give a shout out to my friend Ron Cannon, because we served on the trade committee together. He was a great advocate, and he and Cindy are friends. And now my trade lead is your MP from Kelowna. Tracy Gray is our shadow minister for international trade. She's been doing an incredible job in terms of particularly for the wine industry and others, which is under some attack. But the Buy American and some of the protectionism we're seeing out there, we really need to beat down, and we're committed to doing that. We will deliver a softwood lumber agreement, because only in the last 50 years, it's only been delivered twice by Mulrooney and Harper. It's only Conservatives that get these things done, and we will get it done.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole.
If I know, you can stay, and if you have a follow-up question, I'll come back to you. But I just want to build on that, if you could, Mr. O'Toole, because interesting, we had the director of the airport on yesterday on a session and talking about Canada's response, and he put up some pretty stark graphics with respect to where aerospace is and the airline industry is compared to some of our other competing nations. And in fact, making a reference that some of the European nations are now actually looking at Canada because Canada's unwillingness to open its borders for international travel. So what's driving that? And from your perspective, what action would you take or needs to be taken immediately to address that in very specific terms, if you could? I think it was, Jeff, it was France that Sam was talking about yesterday a bit of, we have relationships, we have agreements, and it was a good reminder to me, and I think to the business, we're an export nation, and those relationships with those international partners are so huge. And we know the growth for the Okanagan is reliant on that and the development of aerospace. We don't quite have a cluster, but getting there, we have great potential. So why such a poor response to this stage, and what specific steps would help address that?
Well, why the government was so slow to respond to this sector in itself, I can't explain. So many of the, I'm trying to choose boneheaded decisions of the Trudeau government is the best polite way to describe it. Because here's the reality, Dan, and the industry knows this. Some of the foreign carriers received the CEWS and some of the wage subsidy and some of the Canadian support programs. At the same time, their governments were coming up with aid packages specifically to the sector. Our carriers were not. And so they were actually seeing plans for their competitors to survive and be more nimble, and then slowly take away business from our carriers. And as you know, if the reopening plans and scaling up of capacity, if the Air France, if the KLMs, if the players of the world start looking at who's open, who's not, and they just start saying, well, as we're ramping up our capacity, I guess we just have to skip Canada, whether it's airlines or cruise ships. Are we going to get it back is the question, Dan. And that's why I said immediately as leader, part of my mandate to my shadow minister of transport was, let's kick the government in the butt and get them going on this. And I met with WestJet, Air Canada. I met with a number of regional players. I met with airport authorities. Like, we realized this was probably the sector in the biggest crisis. And they had just done an Herculean effort at the beginning of COVID to get people home. And then they felt totally abandoned by the Trudeau government. And that's a failure of leadership, Dan, is the only way I can describe it. The second thing, and I can't stress it enough, my nephews live in the UK. You know, the UK government has sent tens of millions of rapid tests to the households of the country to facilitate school and openings. Trudeau was 6 months late in even approving these little diagnostic tests. And had we had them in place at our airports, our ports, we would have been able to accelerate a safe and swift reopening so that we don't miss the flights from Europe, the flights from the US, even the domestic routes I'm worried about because we're so far behind in this rapid screening and testing game. So we're committed to smart private sector partnerships. We're not in the business of attacking the private sector like the Trudeau government. We want to see a private sector-led recovery, and this is one sector we will work very closely with.
I should note, because there might be some on, so test kit sounds good. I hear chambers of commerce are providing it, and in fact in Ontario they are, but as I've reminded some of our small businesses that actually have head offices in Ottawa and elsewhere, we're not authorized because it's a provincial jurisdiction, and BC frankly is the lagger there. I know there's some discussions ongoing, but test kits not even on the short-term horizon out here, but there's some discussion.
And this, let me say this, Dan, this is an area where the federal government had jurisdiction. Federal government approves these tests. They're not cancer drugs, they're just diagnostic tests. They also control all federal border and those issues. I said, use that as the mandate to set up a standard. I applauded when a few months ago, Dr. Henry said that, you know, we don't need a health professional to administer 15-minute at-home tests. That's how all other countries were operating. But because the federal government didn't show any leadership here, we were slow. We got the tests to the provinces in the middle of the second wave, and then we had no national standards in terms of application.
Great. We have a number of questions. It's great people are jumping in on the Q&A. Mr. O'Toole, you've been very generous with your time. We got about 15 minutes more, so we'll try to get to as many questions. And before I go to the Q&A, we had some submitted in advance from some of our members, and I didn't want to stray too far from those, so I picked that up and then I'll go to the Q&A. This question came in from one of our members. Canada's innovation strategies seem inevitably to focus on Canada's largest cities and do not harness the creativity of smaller centers in Kelowna. and like Kelowna. What would your party do to promote innovation, talent, attraction, and investment in mid-sized growing communities like Kelowna and the Okanagan?
Great question, and something we've done a lot of work on. I've worked with the Canadian Council of Innovators. I have a COVID recovery shadow minister with significant private sector experience. And we've done what the government should have been doing, which is come up with a serious innovation plan. And there's two simple words that I will use to underscore what we're going to do: broadband acceleration and taxation. And here's what I mean. The federal government now has 6 or 7 different agencies and departments running programs related to rollout of broadband. So high-speed connectivity. We are going to simplify it, partner with the private sector as much as possible, and hyper-accelerate that. Because if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's people can work and innovate in the smaller cities or gorgeous regions like the Okanagan as easily as they can in the impossible to afford downtown Vancouver. But if you don't have that access, there's a digital divide, particularly for Indigenous communities as well. So this is part of the federal mandate of just hyper driving that. And that gives people a lot of flexibility, not only for work-life balance, less emissions for the environment, but it allows innovation to happen outside of the big cores. Because I think you're right. There's a sense that the government picks and chooses where super clusters are, where they think innovation will be. The second piece, the taxation piece, I truly believe that if we have incentivized approach to bring private sector capital in, that will help startups scale up in Canada without selling or moving to the United States. We need more Shopifys, we need more Hootsuites, we need more innovators, and that access to capital can be incentivized by government with things like flow-through shares and other things that will actually incentivize risk-taking, not with tax dollars, but with a tax assist. There's a lot of excitement we're hearing from the sort of innovation space on some of the ideas we're proposing, and it will be central to our 5-point recovery plan. And I think both broadband and tax make sure it's not just a big city. This will level the playing field.
Yeah, no, we've had some conversations with some of our colleagues around the province, particularly from the major centers that have massive growth challenges. And we've commented that one of the strategies you could help those big cities is make the smaller cities more attractive, and more investment into the mid-sized cities might help alleviate some of that, but I'll leave that with you. I want to go to some of the questions we have, those submitted, and we'll get to as many. And please jump in, those that have joined us, if you have a question. There was someone mentioned an article touting the success of CERB and how the extension of that conversation has led many to discussion around a guaranteed income program going forward. As a business owner, and we've heard this a little bit from some of the small business owners where they need employees, and labor market shortages and challenges in the Okanagan are significant. Cherry growers can't get fruit pickers, crops might be wasted because of it. There are so many labor issues. It's not enabling capable people of doing the work if they're on the government payments, and finding that balance. And some comments around that, if you could.
Sure. I said we supported the government programs out of the gate, the wage subsidy, the others. But one area where the government was not smart is it made CERB too broad, and it actually provided a negative incentive with respect to work. And what we tried to do was constantly improve CERB. The only success we had was allowing people to be able to earn up to a certain amount of money before CERB was clawed back. But you'll see in the next election, Mr. Trudeau will be attacking me based on the fact that I said, by the second wave, we should have learned the lessons from the first and made adjustments, because we were incentivizing people not to work. And people in hospitality and tourism saw this when there was the opening between the first and second wave. They couldn't hire anyone because of the program. The Liberals extended it to all students. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars on 15-year-olds who lived at home with no dependents. That is not smart, and it caused ripples into the private sector and work shortages. And a guaranteed annual income in making the CERB for life, that would not only undermine small businesses and people trying to hire, it would actually change a bit of the social contract we have, which is in Canada, whether you've been here 3 months or 3 generations, if you work hard and provide for your family, there's a nobility in that. And we've got to remove barriers so that people can have success. But if you start actually saying we want to create the CERB permanently, you will cause major reverberations in the workforce where I want to see hiring, and I do want to see an upward pressure on wages by expanding economy. And then the federal government can then deal with income inequalities and address that without turning the CERB into a guaranteed income. And we're the only party with that position. The Liberals, the Green, the NDP all support a guaranteed annual income. And I think it would not only cost $90 billion a year, it would undermine some of the key elements of our society in terms of a private sector-led recovery.
We have another question, and I'm going to paraphrase it here because we've spent a bit of time today talking about the tourism sector and the observations made in the question of generally the wages aren't high wages in that, and they can be seasonal. But I will say on our side too, it's tourism in the Okanagan, central Okanagan, $1 billion a year, massive impact, and it's a key asset. So it's a key component of our economy here. And I'll also add, when we go to the Canadian Chamber, it's always interesting because we deal with our colleagues from Ontario that talk steel, and then we talk about how forestry is so important, right? And so many parts, and it's such a diverse nation. But given where we're going to be a long term coming out of the pandemic with our debt, where is your government, or where would you see your government, if you talk about where we're now as a member of Parliament? Where do you see your party putting the focus? Do you chase the biggest in order to get down the biggest return on investment on those resources and managing resources, or where do the priorities set when you look at that economic recovery, or is it addressing all sectors?
We need to get this country working again, Dan, and you nailed it, talking about steel and auto in Ontario and forestry and wine and tourism. We are an incredibly diverse country in terms of not just our people and that story, but on our economy. And if Ottawa is going to choose which sectors it feels are valued, building back better, what does that mean? That means they don't like certain parts of the economy. They don't like people that get their hands dirty in Kitimat making aluminum, despite the fact that it's 7 times less carbon intense than Chinese aluminum. So the big difference, again, there's 4 parties that are against resources and traditional industries and only 1 in favor. We will focus on getting the country working. So that's why we're going to have direct aid for small business that are in crisis. But we're also very proud of steel, aluminum, the auto parts, lumber, minerals, the oil and gas sector. And in fact, anytime you remove a Canadian resource from the global supply chain, who's replacing it? Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Russia, lower environmental safeguards, zero transparency on what they actually do, poor human rights records. So we are environmental social governance, ESG leaders. I'm sure your chambers had discussions about ESG. I also call it ESGI, because the Indigenous partnerships we're developing in Canada are amongst world standards. So let's pivot discussion on resources to how can we incentivize even more emission reduction while also being proud of what we sell on the world stage and value people working, whether it's in their small business. I spoke with the Mississauga Board of Trade earlier today. Whether you're opening your small business in Mississauga or in Penticton or Kelowna, there's a value in the economic opportunity, the value in the people you employed. So Conservatives are going to have the back of all working Canadians.
I have a question that came in with respect to the position that the Conservatives have on, we're an exporting nation, and one of those that we do a lot of trade with is China. What's your perspective on trade relations with China?
This is an area where we're going to have uncertainty and disruption in the future, because I've worked on these issues both in the private sector and in government, and China's heading in the wrong direction. And we've got to show that we're willing to not, we're a trading nation, we're exporting. One thing not for sale, Dan, is our values. So when there's a genocide taking place, when there's an erosion of, there's a creation of a police state in Hong Kong where 300,000 Canadians live, citizens. There's more Canadians in Hong Kong than in Prince Edward Island, for example. So we can't look the other way when the Chinese state transships steel and aluminum, undermining jobs here in Canada and actually gaming trade and environmental rules-based systems. So I think we have to stand with the United States and our Five Eyes allies and push back, not in an aggressive form, but say we're not going to allow the rules-based system to be played for your advantage at our disadvantage. And there's strength in numbers with our allies and the Five Eyes. But right now we're out of step with the Americans, the UK, Australians, and New Zealand. We're the only country that hasn't made a decision on Huawei, for example, in our 5G infrastructure. So that's got to be key. And because there could be some uncertainty with exports to China, we have to develop growing markets in the Indo-Pacific. We've got to restore the broken relations with India, for example, after Mr. Trudeau's state visit. We've seen tariffs, we've seen disruptions. We literally doubled trade with India when the Conservatives were in government. Indonesia, Vietnam, there's huge marketplaces where there's growing middle classes, huge opportunity for our agricultural sectors, including fruits and wines, but beef, pork, grain, oil seeds, huge opportunities, but we have to go out and get aggressive, get hungry, chase them while we realign global approach to China.
This is the last call for folks. If you have a question you want to submit, please do so now. Mr. O'Toole, you're good for a few more minutes?
Yeah.
All right. I do want to come back to trade for a moment, but speak to internal trade in this country. The Kelowna Chamber and other of our colleagues have been very vocal of we're a trading nation, but we set a poor example sometimes because of the barriers that exist interprovincially. And I know your government, and I will acknowledge MP Albus has been active, as is MP Gray. We've pushed it and had policies passed at the Canadian Chamber, particularly around alcohol. You know, we have some fantastic wines, spirits, distillers that are going great guns, but they're facing barrier of direct-to-consumer trade. And now I understand that, and we appreciate this is a provincial matter, but the federal government has a role. Your thoughts on that and how that can be expedited in that relationship with the federal government, with the provincial leadership?
Absolutely. Well, you are a world-class destination for wines and spirits and craft beers. I also met with some craft beer owners in the Okanagan. And when I tour those businesses, it's a little more fun at the end of the tour than when I visit an auto parts factory. You can't really sample the parts, but you can sample when I visited Summerhill and others. I'm super proud of my team on this front. Dan Albus, Tracy, the Free My Grapes, the initiative Dan has in terms of using federal jurisdiction over Canada Post to circumvent kind of archaic old interprovincial rules with respect to beverage alcohol just shows we're going to push this through. I've also made a pledge, because I've been talking about it with Dan Albus for many years, a pledge to use federal parliament and a reference to the Supreme Court to reverse what I view as an error in the law interpreting our Constitution back 80 years ago. There was a Comeau decision on this just a few years ago where I think there was an opportunity to expand the intention of what our country was. We were always created to encourage east-west traffic, not just through the Great Railway, which we talk about a lot, to the Pacific, but with trade. And what happened over time is special interests and some parochialism set up empires We need to break those down. We can unlock about $1.5 billion in economic activity just from breaking down those barriers. And it's really been conservative leadership. In fact, I was talking to Premier Pallister. He was a former federal MP. He talked about this, and he's watched carefully the work done by Dan Albus and others. So there is a window for us to actually get this done, and it will be a priority for me in the first year or two of our mandate to set a parliamentary schedule, put it to the provinces, and maybe even the Supreme Court.
So we have a couple more questions that were in the queue, but in light of the fact that you've addressed some of them, talking about the resource industries and your perspectives on that, I had a question about the softwood lumber, so I'm glad you flagged that earlier. Quite often we hear, and there is a question with respect to productions of goods in Canada and not to be reliant on international imports. You've addressed some of that. So I'm going to finish things off today, if you could, on talking a bit of one area around immigration and labor. And one of the things that you would never know, we're in a pandemic here in the Okanagan with the price of housing and some of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. But with that brings significant challenges. But we also realize there's a lot more of the gray-haired folks, or less hair, as my case would be, because of the demographic shift. And one of the answers, and we realize that, is foreign workers, bringing talent in, looking at young entrepreneurs that can afford a house, so they're kind of tied together. What's your party stance? And this is one of the questions we had from one of our members in advance with respect to Canada's immigration, the numbers to be admitted, criteria for admittance. We know we need to be much more diverse in the Okanagan to address our long-term labor needs, but some thoughts in that area around immigration and labor to wrap things up.
Another great question. And immigration is critical to our economic success in the future, particularly areas of the country like yours, where there's acute labor shortages under the normal economic circumstances, and there will be again. But there's also a backlog now of family reunification and some of the normal processes of our system. So we are going to modernize and accelerate smart immigration in Canada and actually update systems that are in many cases decades out of date. We're going to accelerate family reunification because that will actually help families with childcare issues if we have more shortages or issues in the future. It also helps give small business, particularly family-owned businesses, flexibility, even support for senior care and things like this. That can be an important tool. The skills piece to immigration, we have to accelerate and work on credential recognition as part of the approval and screening process so that folks can hit the ground and actually be able to work and be productive right away. We still haven't gotten that done yet. And the temporary foreign worker piece is a great example of, we know where the chronic shortages are because we have labor market opinions. We track every job there is in the country. They've all got an occupation code, a NOC code. What do we do with that data? We're just doing Band-Aids with TFWs. We need to pivot both our immigration system and our federal spending on training with the provinces and with secondary institutes of education. We need to actually start addressing long-term gaps, both with training at home and with immigration, to fill the holes, as opposed to just constantly forcing businesses into temporary foreign workers. Seasonal, it can be okay and can be understood, but there are structural non-seasonal parts of our economy that are chronically undersupplied, and that's a productivity problem for our country. So this is another case where Mr. Trudeau is very good at announcing things, very poor at delivering on things. I will make sure we act. We've got to modernize a lot of parts of government that are really too old and not working swiftly enough. But let me highlight to a previous question, Dan, because could you imagine if with the TFW and some of the programs that we have, if we created a guaranteed annual income and we're addressing labor shortages at the same time we're actually incentivizing people not to work, what would that do for the service sector, for hospitality, for sectors that are constantly challenged in terms of employment? We would actually undermine our own efforts to fill those gaps. The BC government recent report on the guaranteed annual income kind of found it actually will have more negative impacts than positives. So immigration's important, but we have to update and make sure our systems work better and faster.
Excellent. Mr. O'Toole, you've been very generous with your time. I don't know if you want to get into our office pool. Do I need to prepare my team for an all candidates forum this fall, or?
Well, you better ask Prime Minister Trudeau that, but we have to be ready. It's why I have this amazing studio to do these virtual sessions. If as we open up, there could be a hybrid election. Mr. Trudeau announced a national campaign manager today, so he seems to be posturing for it. All I have to say is I'll fight for Canadians, and I'll be ready when the election fight comes.
And if that occurs or not, we would love to have you out here. And, you know, I did say to someone recently, Mr. O'Toole, that, you know, many elected officials have found this is a great way to connect with constituents, but there is nothing better than in person and face to face. So we would look forward to hosting you when your schedule allows. Here in the Okanagan, I'm sure my other colleagues from Penticton and Greater Westside and the other chambers would do more than work together to host you if you ever make your way out this way.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I've been talking to Tracy, Dan, and Helena, our candidate in Penticton, about a trip in July. So I'm excited to get back, and maybe we can do something. I look forward to it.
And as a former broadcaster, I prefer the roving mic and the old I was going to say Donahue, but then some people might, who are you referring to? Phil Donahue, the old roaming microphone. So we'd love to do that in person. You've been great with your time, and thanks to everyone in the other chambers for participating and the support of the Okanagan Chamber's COVID Response Coalition in promoting this in advance. Mr. O'Toole, would love to have you in person and love to give you an Okanagan beautiful wine for you to take and enjoy, but we're not in person. So what we're going to do on your behalf, that we'll be making a small donation to the local food bank in acknowledgement of your time here today. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for that. And thanks for all of your leadership with our small business throughout this last tough year. Hope is on the horizon, so best wishes to you and your families.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Toole, and thanks all of those that have joined us. It's going to be a scorcher this weekend. Please be safe out there. Put on your sunscreen. Enjoy that Okanagan sunshine. Thanks very much, and we will see you on July 7th to talk about 5G.